Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Dinosaur Gaming, where we learn to be a better player. Today, we're going to talk about the leaders of Jump to Lightspeed. That's right, Set 4 for Star Wars Unlimited is only a couple weeks away, and we have finally had all of the leaders revealed. So we have 18 new leaders to go through. And today, we're going to talk about each leader a bit more in depth, not necessarily talking about whether they are competitive or viable, but what each leader is trying to do and what are the cards that make them work or not work. So let's start off. We're going to jump right in and we're going to start off with the first one, Han Solo. So Han Solo alongside Boba Fett is one of the two starter leaders this set. So for those who don't know, Han Solo says, revealed action, reveal the top card of your deck, then attack with a unit. If the revealed card and the unit that are attacking have different odd costs, you get one extra power for that attack. And on 5, he can deploy as either just a 3/7, not ideal, or as an upgrade. And when you deploy him as an upgrade, for each odd cost unit or upgrade that you have, you get to ready a resource. Now, what are the advantages and disadvantages of this leader? So for one thing, this is the first time we've had a soft deck restriction in that you want your deck to be only odd cards. You don't need it to be only odd cards, but ideally, if you want the effect to work, not only of Han, but a few of the cards that work with him. So if we look at, for example, one of the key cards of the deck, Boshek, when you play him as an upgrade, you discard 2 cards from your deck, and each of those that are odd go to your hand. Now, pilots as a whole have had very mixed reviews, and part of that is because it's easy to remove them, or if you put an upgrade or a pilot on a unit and then they get removed by, let's say, Takedown or Fell the Dragon, you just lost 2 cards for the price of 1. However, with upgrades with pilots like this, that not only refund themselves, Boshek, you're spending a card, but you're getting 2 back ideally if your entire deck is odd cards. You are maintaining hand advantage, card advantage, or whatever you want to call it, even if your unit gets removed. So for 2 costs, you get to basically give a unit +1/+2 and draw 2, which is very strong. Now, of course, we also have Han Solo as a unit himself. Thankfully, he is an odd cost. And when you attach him as an upgrade, if the unit itself is Millennium Falcon, you can attack with the attached unit no matter what it is, but if it is the Falcon, it deals this combat damage before the defender, kind of like the Han Solo unit from set 1, or basically Shoot First from set 1. This is a very strong unit, and the piloting only costs 2, which is not odd. However, the card is. So that is how we circumvent some of these turns where you'll have an even cost of resources. You don't want to waste it. So if you have 6 resources, you don't want to just play 5 and float 1 resource. Of course, you could play a 5 and a 1, but a lot of the piloting costs being different than the actual cost of the card kind of helps you go around that. However, it's not just about having odd cards in your decks. There are some cards, for example, C-3PO, which work extremely well in the deck. Because if you look at what Han Solo does, you get to tap him and reveal the top card before you declare the attack. So with C-3PO, if you use Han's effect, no matter what, you will draw the card. You'll get to reveal it, see what it is, and then you get to call that cost with C-3PO. However, because the cost is not odd of C-3PO, he'll never get the extra attack. Sometimes that's not what you care about. Now, of course, we have the 2 Millennium Falcons that work with the Han we showed earlier. Luckily, they are both odd costs that work very well. The new one lets you put an additional pilot on it, so you get to do a bit of a Voltron if you have Han. And finally, we have another ship that works specifically with odd cards. Shuttle Tiderium, it says on attack, discard a card from your deck. If it's an odd cost, you may give an experience token to another unit. Fantastic. Very strong. Three resources for 2/4 is pretty average on cost, especially for space. So those are the advantages and disadvantages of Han. Is it going to be a good deck? We don't know yet, but there are a lot of key cards that are helping him at the moment get what he wants to do with those odd only costs. So next up, we're going to move on to Kazuda Xiong. I'm so sorry if I mispronounced that name. Now this is a leader that had a lot of talk when it was revealed, because its action says, tap him, a friendly unit loses all abilities for this round. Take an extra action after this one. That is a very strange ability. And on the flip side, he's a 4 resource, 2/5, deploys on 4, or you get to put him as a pilot with a very similar ability on attack. Choose any number of friendly units, they lose all their abilities, he gives +3/+3. Now, what is the point of this? Normally, you don't want your own units to lose their abilities. It doesn't make sense. However, a few cards were revealed alongside of him, and then, of course, there are a few older cards as well that we'll take a look at, of negative abilities on strong cards. So a good example of a new card that was revealed is Contracted Hunter. So 3 cost for a 4/4 ambush. Very strong. Normally we've seen this ability, this kind of stat line be on a 4 cost. If you look at Forlom or mounted cohort, modded cohort. However, this has a drawback that says when the regroup phase starts, defeat this unit. Obviously you don't want to lose the unit. So you get to play him, ambush, then you get the Kazuda. Use his tap ability, which actually doesn't consume your action. So it's almost a free action in a way. So that's one. Another good example that came out at the same time is Fireball. It's very similar concept. 2 cost, 3/3, ambush. Now that is a very strong ability, as a vast majority of turn 1 space plays are 2/3 or 1/3. Some of them are 3/2 admittedly, but being able to immediately take out your opponent's first turn space play and not have to deal with the drawback of when regroup phase starts, deal damage because of Kazuda, puts you at such an advantage. You not only got rid of their turn 1 play, but you also prevented them from putting a pilot on it on turn 2. Now, of course, there are many other cards that were revealed in earlier sets that work extremely well with this, such as the Fugitive Wookiee. It's a bounty. It's a 2 cost, 3/3, a Battlefield Marine, very strong stat line. This card didn't see much play because the drawback is pretty crippling, because if your opponent kills it at the right time, you just wasted an entire turn of attacks, not only Wookiees, but another unit as well. Of course, there's Millennium Falcon, very famous card, very strong card with a heavy downside. But with Kazuda, if you play him, turn 2, attack with it, then you can use Kazuda. You don't actually have to pay his cost. The regroup phase is within the same turn. Very strong. Now, of course, there are many other bounty cards that are similar. Unlicensed Headhunter, we have Wanted Insurgents, 3 cost, 4/4, very strong. You don't have to deal with the bounty. Clone Deserter, Cartel Turncoat. Good cards with a drawback that you can ignore. Now, that said, we did mention a lot of bounty cards, which goes to say that Kazuda himself pretty much nullifies any bounties placed against you. So if you're playing against one of the strongest decks that we saw recently in set 3, Bosk, Kazuda can kind of nullify it if your opponent decides to put, I don't know, let's say a top target on you. Attached unit gains the bounty. However, if you do Kazuda, you make it so as if the bounty is just not there. That is a very strong effect to prevent him. And his stat line being a 4 cost, 2/5, we've seen that in Sabine, we've seen that in the old Lando. It's alright, it's not bad, it's a bit more aggro focused. However, Kazuda himself doesn't seem to be much of an aggro leader, maybe a bit more of a slower aggro or like a tempo deck. We have also a few other new cards. We have the Stolen AT Hauler, 3 cost, 4/5 in space, very, very strong stat line for 3 cost, with a very, very big drawback that says when defeated, choose an opponent. They may play this unit from the owner's discard pile for free. Now, that is a very negative effect, because normally if you would play this, your opponent immediately uses a takedown, then gets to play it for free. You can prevent that entirely. Just play him. On your next action, you Kazuda it. The action is back to you, and you get to just use this as a 3 cost, 4/5, and pretty much guarantee getting control of the space arena. Now, there are a few other cards, such as Outlaw Corona, if you're playing with green. Very good stat line, 3/5 for 3. You can nullify the bounty. And alternatively, if you are playing with blue, I don't think it's the best color pairing with him, but we do have the new Dakar Cargo Frigate. Normally, 5 cost for a 6/7 is very, very strong. It has the downside of having -1, -0 for each damage on it. You can remove that ability entirely and keep him as a 5 cost 6/7. So very strong unit. on deploy, giving +3/+3 as well on turn 3 when you have 4 resources is also very strong, especially considering you have a lot of space presence with the AT Hauler, the Outlaw Corona, the Fireball, the Millennium Falcon. I think people are underrating him completely, and he is a very strong leader, and we're going to see more of him soon. Following that up, we have Admiral Akbar. Now, this is a bit more of a strange leader. So Admiral Akbar says, action, pay 1, exhaust a non-leader unit on either side, and if you do, its controller creates an X-Wing token. So there are obviously 2 main ways to use this. The number 1 way would be to exhaust your own units. It doesn't need to be a non-token unit, so if you already have an X-Wing, you can tap an X-Wing to create an X-Wing. 1 cost for 2/2 is not the worst thing in the world, however, you are losing the attack on it. Alternatively, you can use it on a big unit that you don't want your opponent to attack with. They have an Avenger, let's say, or a Reinforcement Walker, and you want to prevent that from swinging. It's okay to just give them a 2/2 X-Wing. He flips on 6, being a 3/8 with an almost identical ability on attack, exhaust the unit, create an X-Wing token. Very strange ability. It is not to be underestimated, of course, because exhausting units we've seen is strong. We have other leaders that have pretty similar abilities. If you look at, for example, Thrawn from set 1, he pays 1 to exhaust something. Thrawn might not have seen much competitive success, but I think a big part of that was the prevalence of faster decks that didn't let it do what it wants, or control decks that didn't need to run yellow, that were able to play more big threats. However, now with Akbar, we have a few cards that were revealed that synergize with his ability a little bit. So, of course, we have the Blade Squadron B-Wing. When played, if another player controls 3 or more exhausted units, you can give a shield token to a unit. Very likely that your opponent will have more exhausted units if you are giving them more X-Wings. That's kind of the idea behind this card. And of course, it's a trap. If an opponent controls more space units than you, ready each space unit that you control. This is a very strong effect. Will it be relevant? We don't know yet. But considering the fact that you might be giving your opponent a lot of little 2/2 space units, maybe not every single turn, but if you're giving them more space units, but you still have a few, you can use this to untap something big or a couple of yours, and then immediately take space control back, which could be interesting. And finally, we also have Home 1 on my mark. If an opponent controls 3 or more space units, same theme, same concept, this costs 3 less to play. With Ambush, of course, being a 9 cost 7/8, costing 3 less to play, it would be a 6 cost 7/8 with Ambush. Very strong, kills almost everything in space, barring a few of the very big, we have Relentless, Avenger, those, of course, but everything else will get defeated by this. So Admiral Akbar is definitely an interesting leader. We haven't seen too much synergy with him. Maybe a few more cards will be revealed, but that's where currently he stands. Finally, for our before last, we're going to reveal in yellow here. We have Admiral Trench. Now, this is a leader that has had a lot of very mixed reception. So for those who don't know, his front side says action, tap, discard a card that costs 3 or more from your hand. If you do, draw a card. That is a very powerful effect, considering that cards that cost 3 or more is a vast majority of your deck normally. In an average 50 card deck, most people play around 10 to 14 turn 1 plays, which are 1 cost and 2 costs. So almost 35 to 38 of your cards in your deck will be 3 cost or more. So anything that you don't currently want, that you think if it's turn 2 and you already have a 9 cost in your hand, you don't want them, you could throw it away, draw another card. Hand filtering is very powerful. However, that is not the most interesting thing about Admiral Trench. It is his deploy. So unlike other leaders, he doesn't have an epic action. He has an action of paying 3 and tapping him if you have 6 resources or more, and you can deploy this. And because this is not an epic action, you can do this every single turn. When deployed, you get to reveal the top 4 cards of your deck. Your opponent chooses 2 of them to discard. Then you get to draw 1 and discard the other. Very interesting effect. The big part of it is, if we, for a moment, disregard the fact that you are losing 4 cards from your deck, this basically says, starting on turn 5, or resource turn 6, however you want to look at it, every single turn you get to pay 3 to get a readied leader for 5, and you get to draw a card. That is a very strong effect. Now, of course, that might not be the best tempo effect, because on the 6th resource turn, you ideally want to play a 6-cost card. Same with the 7-cost, 8-cost later on. However, in a drawn-out game where every single turn you get to get an extra card, a 4 or 5 readied unit that can attack right away, and it's a leader. Leaders are not that easy to get rid of. Of course, they need to either attack it or you take down or something. Many cards don't affect leaders. I think people are underestimating him severely. Let's take a look at a few of the cards that work very well with him. Number 1, of course, we have bases. Droid Manufactory, alongside a couple of other bases, have the effect that says when you deploy a leader, do something. This one says when you deploy a leader, create 2 battle droid tokens. This might not have seen too much play outside of a couple of PQ showings with IG-88 or whatever, but with Trench, every single time you deploy him, you get 2 extra battle droid tokens, and that could be every single turn. That is a very strong effect. Every time you're deploying him for 3 costs, you're getting a 4/5 that's ready, 2 battle droid tokens already. Power of the Dark Side and Merciless Contest don't affect you. Avenger doesn't affect leaders anyways, but just being able to flood the board pretty much for 3, you get to do whatever you want with the tokens. Either use them to trade, or you get to exploit with them. Very strong effect, very reusable. I mean, not much else to say. Of course, if you'd rather not use that, there is the new Data Vault, which is your minimum deck size is increased by 10. If you're worried that every turn you're losing 4 cards alongside of his actual tap action, which is discard a card, draw a card, you might get yourself into deck milled situation. Data Vault is definitely a good option. Alternatively, we also have the red base from set 2 that says when you deploy a leader, draw a card. If you want to draw 2 cards instead of 1 every time you deploy them. All good alternatives, honestly. Oops. All right, so now let's look at some of the cards that work well with him. So a card that was revealed alongside of him is the Swarming Vulture Droid. While this is a pretty interesting card, and I believe it was meant to be played with Trench, I'm not sure if that is the appropriate deck to put this in. Of course, the idea being that anything that's not this card costs 3 or more, you get to immediately throw it away, draw again, hope to get another Vulture Droid. Definitely could be interesting. Alternatively, we have Invincible. So if you have a Separatist card, which he's a Separatist and an official, this would cost 1 less to play. So this is actually a 5-cost 6/6 that says when you deploy a leader, you may return a non-leader unit that costs 3 or less to its owner's hand. And as we discussed earlier, Admiral Trench can be deployed every turn, theoretically, assuming he lives, of course. So anything that's not a big boy can immediately get bounced back to hand. Very strong effect. This would basically need to be dealt with right away, or it will create infinite value, which is Admiral Trench's strong suit. Now, of course, we are discarding cards, not only with his front, but also his deploy effect. What do we do with cards in our discard? Why do we want cards in our discard? Because we have cards like Palpatine's Return. So right off the bat, you get to discard Darth Vader or just Maul, I think is called, or honestly pretty much anything, but especially with Force cards, you get to play them earlier. If you're playing Admiral Trench, if you're playing green, which is what I would recommend here, you get to play those cards earlier than expected. Very strong effect. We have a very similar card in Salvage. However, this is only for vehicles. There's no discount on it, but being able to play anything from your discard kind of gives you a second hand to work with. Very similar to how Smuggle works for a lot of decks, especially like Han and Quinlan and whatever. Very powerful effects that give you more flexibility. And finally, of course, we are worried potentially about decking ourselves out, because if we're drawing an extra card every turn and we are milling 4 every time we deploy him, we have Reprocess that says choose 4 units in your discard pile, put them back on the bottom of your deck, and create that many battle droid tokens. Honestly, paying 3 costs for 4 droids is not a bad deal. This card didn't see much play, mainly because Getting 4 units in your discard pile doesn't happen as often as people would think, and by the time it does happen, the game is very far out normally, and you'd rather be playing other things. However, in a deck where you are throwing your own cards away, this could see a lot more play a lot earlier. And of course, we have restock. If you don't want to deck out, you get to put some cards back into your deck. Now, I think people are overestimating how much you're going to mill yourself in an average game that lasts until resources, let's say 7 to 10. Most of the time when you finish the game, you still have at least 25 cards in your deck. I'd say around 20 to 25 cards in your deck, which means theoretically you could have deployed Trench around 4 times without even being close to milling yourself out. So I think this is a leader that we need to keep an eye on. I think he's very strong. Maybe not so much in limited because you have a much smaller deck size, and milling yourself out there is a much more realistic situation. Finally, for our last yellow card, we have Rio Durant. He is our last pilot for yellow, and he says tap for 1 cost, attack with a space unit. It gets +1 attack and saboteur for this attack. That is a very strong effect. Of course, for those who don't know, Saboteur makes you ignore sentinels and defeat any shields that the defender may have. On the flip side, he can deploy either as a 5-cost 3/5 with Saboteur, or you get to attach something and give them +3/+5 and Saboteur. And if it's a transport, it also gets another +1, so a +4/+5 on a 5-cost. That is a very, very strong power up. So honestly, this card is very aggressive. Saboteur letting you ignore space sentinels makes it so you can just focus on your game plan of just getting your opponent's base to 0 or getting it up to 30, depending on how you're counting it, and allowing to ignore your opponent's space sentinels or even defeat some of their shields. Definitely surprises some opponents. Well, maybe not surprised because they'll know what you'll be playing, but you get to tell them no when they try to stop your game plan. That said, at the moment, there are not that many Space Sentinels that are played. Of course, we have the Black Sun Starfighter that is played in villainy decks. We have Bright Hope that's played, of course, and a few others. And I'm sure there's going to be a few more this set that see a lot more play. And being able to just ignore them and just hit face all the time is a very strong effect. So now let's take a look at a few of the cards that work pretty well with him. We have a lot of low-cost space units that saw play. So for example, if you look at the Contracted Jumpmaster, it's a 3-cost 2/4, not necessarily a good strong stat line. However, this is a transport, and you get to attack. If you attack with him with Rio's effect, it's a 3 damage. If you put Rio on him, that's a 6/9 that you'd have to deal with. Very strong. Then of course we have a few other space units, none of them that directly work with Rio particularly, except for this, of course. If you played a Bounty Hunter or Pilot card this phase, oh no, not even, you would need to actually play the card. So none of these have direct synergy with Rio, but Rio's effect is a very generic, strong effect that will close out games faster than people expect. All right, so now let's move on to our red cards. So for the first one that we're going to look at is the second starter card, Boba Fett. So Boba Fett says, whenever you deal non-combat damage, you may exhaust this leader. If you do, deal 1 indirect damage to a player. Basically, what that means is anytime you use a card that says deal indirect damage, or even a card that just does damage. So if we're looking at Daring Raid, Open Fire, you get 1 extra damage. Obviously, you don't choose where that damage goes, but that doesn't matter because, yes, of course, if you're only doing 3 to 4 indirect damage, your opponent will always choose where it goes and they'll never put it where you want it. But if you're doing 3 to 4 every single turn, that adds up very, very quickly. You're just doing damage indirectly to their base. And while you are dealing with their units, they are getting chipped at slowly, putting them further and further behind. That is the idea behind Boba Fett. Now, when he gets deployed, he gets either get deployed as a 4/7, typical Boba stat lines. However, this is at 6, like 5 for the old one. However, when he gets deployed as an upgrade, he gets +4/+4, and he gets to do 4 damage not indirect, and it's divided however you choose among enemy units. This is basically a smaller overwhelming barrage. Now, that is a very strong effect for a deploy. You get to deploy your leader, give something +4/+4, and pretty much deny part of, if not the entire board, even if he gets removed right away. So let's say you flip this, you deal 4 damage, you kill a unit, and then they use a confiscate or some other upgrade removal. Yes, that sucks. You just lost your leader. However, you already used your leader's primary effect, which is to deal the damage and win back the board. Very strong effect. People are underestimating. Yeah, not much else to say. Pretty good card. Now let's look at a few of the cards that work with him. Now, of course, there are a bunch of indirect damage cards. We're not going to look at all of them. All I can say is after some testing with and against this leader, I said that indirect damage is a very strong deck, and Boba Fett is definitely one of the best ways to play it. So let's look at first Fett's Fire Spray. So the Fire Spray that says, when played and on attack, deal 1 indirect damage to a player. However, if you control Boba Fett in any way, deal 2 damage instead. So when you play him or attack with him, not only do you do the 2 indirect damage, you can tap Boba to do a 3rd indirect damage. A very strong effect. And if, hypothetically speaking, if you're using this with Energy Conversion Lab to use Ambush, or if you're playing this with Triple Dark Raid, you get to do both the when played and on attack at the same time. Very strong effects, honestly. If you're using Triple Dark Raid, and let's say they have no units on play, you deal 2 to the base, tap Boba, that's already a 3 to the base. Then you attack with him, that's another 4. And on attack triggers again, that's another 2. So you just dealt 9 damage to their base. And he comes back to your hand, so you get to repeat this in the next turn. Very, very strong card, especially used with Boba Fett. Then, of course, we have the Hunting Aggressor. Indirect damage you deal to opponents is increased by 1. This increases it from every source. So in the prior setting, if let's say this is already in play and you play Fate's Fire Spray, each instance of 2 indirect damage is now 3, and then when you tap Boba instead of 1, that's 2. So the damage that this deals increases very quickly, and this is not even a unique card. You can have more than one of this out. Very dangerous card. And then of course we have the king of indirect damage. We have the Devastator. 8 cost is pretty late, especially for a deck that's trying to win much earlier. However, this is like a closing out the game. When played, deal 4 indirect damage to each opponent. However, the first phrase says you assign all indirect damage you deal to your opponents. Very strong effect. You get to play this, kill whatever you want, and indirect damage bypasses shields and any damage prevention. So you get to pretty much kill almost anything that's in play that's not too big. And if it survives anything else that you're doing, including Boba's effect himself, you get to choose where it goes. If this doesn't get dealt with right away, you pretty much win the game. And finally, we have the, if that was the king, I guess this could be the queen of indirect damage. We have Planetary Bombardment. Deal 8 indirect damage to a player. If you control a capital ship, deal 12 indirect damage instead. Very strong card that lets you close out a game most of the time. If you're doing a ton of indirect damage, they don't have many units left, or they don't have much health left on their base. So this will usually end up giving you a very big advantage, or just end the game right away. All right, that's enough for Boba. Let's move on to the next one. We have Captain Phasma, our First Order leader. Captain Phasma says, action tap. If you played a First Order card this phase, deal 1 damage to a base. And she deploys on 5 as an epic action. On the other side, it says she's a 5 cost 4/6, and on attack, if you played another First Order card this phase, you may deal 1 damage to a unit. If you do, deal 1 damage to a base. Very strong effect. It's a no cost, basically deal 1 damage to base. Very similar to if we look at, let's say, Sabine, doing an extra damage every turn. However, you're not doing that damage to yourself, and the only cost is to play a First Order card. Another similarity, I guess, to a much lesser extent would be Darth Vader from set 1. That you would have to have paid 1, but you did the damage to a base and a unit. The only cost here is to play a First Order card, like we said. So let's take a look at what the First Order cards are this set. Now, So far, these are the first order cards that have been revealed. There are still a solid 70 to 80 cards left to be revealed in the set, so we might have a few more. But let's look at a few of the key cards. We're not going to take a look at all of these, just to show that there is actually quite a few of them. So there won't be necessarily a lack of cards to play with this. If we put 3 of each in some of them, you might not actually play, like Finalizer. Yes, it's a first order, but it's an 11 cost in a deck that's pretty aggressive. However, having 36 to 39 cards that you can easily round out with events or more generic cards is not bad. So let's take a look at some of the key cards for first order. And of course, we have General Hux. So General Hux says each other friendly first order unit gets raid 1. Very strong, basically kind of like red 3 from set 1, however only just for first order. And then the second action says if you played a first order card, you get to tap him to draw a card. Very, very strong effect. One of the downsides, let's say, to aggro or playing low cost cards is that you run out of cards very quickly, because on when you have 4 resources, normally instead of playing a 4 resource card, you might play 2 resource cards. Well, that runs you out of cards very quickly. So General Hux helps you replenish your hand to keep going. And I'm sure, as you guys have noticed here, a lot of the cards are very low cost. We have a TIE Fighter for 1. It's a 2/1 that can attack for 3 because you might have a token unit. We have cards that create token units. Kijimi Patrollers is first order, creates a token on play. Then of course we have Kylo's Tile Silencer from set 2, very strong card, 3/2 for 2. Just a lot of generically good cards. Of course, we have Von Rex TIE Interceptor that was revealed. 3/4. Its abilities are a bit strange. While this unit has 4 or more power, it gains Overwhelm, and it has 6 or more power, it gains Raid 1. Won't necessarily see this ability trigger much in this deck. However, having just a 3 cost 3/4 in space is pretty good on play. You can pretend it says when played, deal 1 damage to the opponent's base. Pretty strong effect overall. And additionally, there's a lot of cards in first order that deal indirect damage as well. Not as much as Boba Fett that we discussed. However, we have 1 indirect damage here on attack when defeated. We have 2 here when you attack if you have the initiative. We have Sith Trooper that works with it. For each damaged enemy unit, he gets an extra attack. And then, of course, we have the TIE Dagger Vanguard that on play can deal 2 damage to an already damaged unit. There's a lot going on here. Some of it doesn't necessarily synergize with each other. But Captain Phasma herself is a pretty strong leader, and dealing 1 every turn nonstop kind of puts like a smaller clock on the opponent's base. If you're trying to win the game by turn 5 or 6, you can basically pretend that their base has 6 less health. That's pretty much what it is. However, because it's not a triggered ability, it's an action. Very often you might lose the initiative, which could be a big downside. Part of the reason why you see a lot of Sabine players not use their ping, because it's often better to keep the initiative and attack with the unit next phase before it gets removed. And of course, the last card we're going to look at here is Captain Phasma herself as a unit. Very strong ability. It says when played and on attack, you may give another first order unit +2/+2 for this phase. This is not a once a turn, so if you're playing this with Energy Conversion Lab, you get to give 2 instances of +2/+2. I think the best use of this is the turn that you deploy Phasma. She comes in as a 4/6, then you can ECL this out, attack something for 5, give +4/+4 to Phasma, will then attack the base for 8 damage plus her own ability, so potentially 9 damage. Very strong card, and I think this deck is going to definitely surprise some people with how aggressive it is, and it can definitely hold its own. Next up, we're going to look at the other first order leader. We have Major Von Reg. The Major Von Reg says play a vehicle unit from your hand. If you do, give another unit +1/+0 for this phase. And he epic action deploys on 4, either as a 2/5 or as a +3/+3 upgrade pilot. That says on attack, you may give another unit in this arena +1/+0 for this phase. This is an interesting card. It is, once again, pretty aggressive, which is what you would expect from Red, right? The aggression aspect. Giving a unit +1 attack is essentially doing 1 extra damage to base, if you want to look at it that way. So it's pretty similar to what Phasma does, what Sabine does. However, when you have a unit that's ready and that wants to attack, you often don't want to spend your first action tapping and playing another vehicle from your hand to first give that an extra attack and then finally do an attack, because it gives your opponent the time to deal with the threat, to deal with whatever you just gave an extra attack to. So not 100% convinced. Maybe we'll see some cards that work extremely well with it. However, being able to deploy on 4 with the +3/+3 and give that ability as well, basically on his deploy turn, he does 4 damage, is one way of looking at it. Very high damage, but high risk leader. Again, in a theoretical setting, does as much damage as Sabine, but there is some counterplay to it. And is that going to be enough to prevent it? Maybe. So there are a lot of space units that work very well. These are all the vehicles that he might want to be playing. Of course, Disabling Fang Fighter is going to be a very big staple of this set, I believe, with all the pilots running around. Of course, there's Relentless Fire Spray. If you're playing double red, you get to attach with them, but it's a 6 cost. I don't think you'll be getting much. You'll be getting to 6 cost much with this leader. You don't want to, at least. Ruthless Vader could be good to close out a game. And then, of course, we have the TIE Interceptor that we looked at a bit with Phasma. Works really well with Von Reg himself. If you play this on turn 2, on turn 3, you get to deploy him on it, and that becomes quite a threat, because we're talking about it's turn 3, right? And you already have a 6/7 in play that has Overwhelm and Raid 1. So basically it's a 7/7 in play that when attacked gives an extra attack to something else. There is not much in the game that can deal with a 7/7 in space on turn 3. If it's your only unit, of course, you'll get the Power of the Darksider or something, but you can't take down it, you can't Fel the Dragon it, you're gonna have to deal with it. But of course, being a pilot, there's always the downside that if you play it, it gets removed. The next turn, you have nothing to deploy on. So you'd have to come out into ground if you want, or wait until you have a ship that sticks. All right, so that's it for the red leaders. Let's move on to the... I'm sorry, that's it for the red villainy leaders. Let's move on to the red heroism leaders. So first up, we have Luke Skywalker. Luke Skywalker says, tap. If you attack with a fighter unit this phase, deal 1 damage to a unit. A tap ping is a very strong effect. We've seen ping effects maybe not dominate, but being very prevalent in the recent competitive events in both Cad Bane and Quinlan Voss. Admittedly, this is not a triggered ability like those two. This is closer to, let's say, the Mandalorian deck that was in set 2 with Bo-Katan. But fighter is a much more generic term than Mandalorian was. So on the flip side, let's see, he deploys on 6 as a 5/6, not the best. However, as a pilot, this is a unique ability that says this upgrade can't be defeated by enemy card abilities. It's a leader that you cannot confiscate or Disabling Fang Fighter, so you need to deal with the unit that it's on. And then the attached unit becomes a leader. If it's a fighter, it gains on attack. You may deal 3 damage to a unit. Very, very powerful effect, being able to deal with a board while you're dealing damage to base, or deal with 2 units at the same time. An effect not to be underestimated. So now we need fighters. Pretty much everything Luke wants is with fighters. So let's take a look at what fighters we have. Well, luckily we have a lot of them. There have been quite a few that have been revealed this set, but honestly, most of the smaller space units, even in earlier sets, have been fighters. And we're going to take a look at one of the key cards that were revealed this set that work very well with Luke is Red 5, the X-Wing that I believe was his, right? So it says on attack, you may deal 2 damage to a damaged unit. Well, lucky for you, Luke's ability damages a unit already for you. So it's a good way for you to deal with those extra stragglers. Like, let's say your opponent has a ground presence and you don't. Well, with this, you attack with whatever you played in turn 1. You use Luke's ping, and then you play this next turn, you get to attack and kill whatever was on the ground. Or, I think more importantly, if this survives until your resource turn 6 and you deploy Luke on this, not only does it become a very big unit, of course, but you get to trigger their abilities in whatever order you want. That's right, you get to attack, trigger Luke's 3 damage to a unit, then immediately trigger this guy's to do an extra 2 damage to that unit. That's 5 damage, and that will kill almost everything that's in play. Very strong card, especially when used with Luke Skywalker. Of course, there are quite a few other ones. We have Wing Leader here because, that's right, most of these fighters, including the new one, are Rebel. Very, very strong card. Could also be used very well with Tarkin Town, because you're pinging, you get to choose something very early on and kill it. Maybe not guaranteeing you, but giving you a good chance of having board present. As an extra card, if you are playing double red, of course you have Aggression, the card, but there's also Relentless Fire Spray if you'd like. It says ready this unit, on attack, ready this unit, use this ability only once each round. While it's not a fighter, if you do manage to get to turn 6, play this and somehow this doesn't get dealt with, if you deploy Luke on it, you get to attack twice. That's already 16 damage to base, and Luke cannot be removed. So if they don't have Rivals Fall or some other way to deal with a giant 8-11, then you pretty much close out the game. And now for our last red leader, we're going to look at Poe Dameron. He is also a pilot, but in a different way. Unlike most of the leaders, he cannot deploy normally. Instead, he cannot deploy as a pilot normally. Instead, you have to pay 1 and tap him when he's on his leader side. You get to flip him and attach him to a friendly vehicle without a pilot. He gives that ship +2/+1. And he also has the ability to pay 1 to attach this to another unit without a pilot on it, only once each round. That is a very interesting effect, namely because it is not an epic action, so you can do that pretty much every turn that you haven't used that ability. So not only that doesn't consume the epic action, so if you've used it for the first 3 turns and then it's been dealt with, you get to still deploy him on 5 as a 4/6 on ground. Very, very strong card. And not only that, he has a few cards that work extremely well with him. The first one, of course, being Black One, his own ship, right? So this says while this unit is upgraded, it gets +1/+0. And then on attack, if you control Poe Dameron, unit, upgrade, or leader, you may deal 1 damage to a unit. So in general, this is attacking as it is going to do 1 damage to a unit if you're playing this in a Poe deck, no matter what. If you deploy Poe on him on turn, if you play this turn 1 and then turn 2 you attach Poe to him, he becomes a 5/4. A 5/4 that deals 1 damage on attack. Very, very strong ability. You are only spending 1 on turn 2, that would be floating 2 resources, and normally that would suck. However, there is another card here that works extremely well with Poe. We have Eject. Detach a pilot upgrade, move it to the ground arena as a unit, and exhaust it, and draw a card. That is a crazy card with Poe, because if after you deploy him on your turn 1 play, whether it's Black One or A-Wing or anything, you attack with it, deal your damage, and then you get to eject, take that pilot out, bring it to the ground as a 4/6 on turn 2, and you draw a card. Not only that, your leader is now in play as a 4/6, and you haven't even used his epic action. So hypothetically speaking, you could get Poe into play as a ground unit 4 times a game, 3 times with eject, then once as his epic action, and that is not even considering his own ability that you can pay 1 every turn to move him on a ship or move him around when you already have 2 ships. You attack with 1, pay 1, move it to the other ship, attack again. Poe is a very aggressive, very fast leader. We have a few other cards, of course, that work well with him. Quite a few other pilots. And pilots is what this deck wants, right? Because if they're constantly spending their removal to get Poe off of your units, then your other pilots are free to wreak mayhem. Of course, we have BB-8 that says it's a 1 cost to pilot. However, if you pay an extra 2, you get to ready a resistance unit. And guess what? Poe Dameron is a resistance unit. So if you made that play we spoke about earlier and ejected him on turn 2, you get to attack with him on turn 3 and then attach BB-8 to whatever space unit you have left and ready your Poe again and attack again. It is a very aggressive, very fast deck. All right. Yes, of course, before we move on, we also have Red Leader. If you are playing him in a green, it says when a pilot upgrade attaches to this unit, you get to create an X-Wing token. Works obviously very well with Poe Dameron because, well, you get to attach him whenever you want. You'll always have a pilot available. All right. Next, let's move on to our other pilot leader. We have Wedge Antilles, who says, action, play a card from your hand using piloting. It costs 1 less. And on the flip side, he is once again a potential pilot, 5 cost for a 3/6, or you get to deploy him as a pilot for +3/+4, and on attack, next pilot card you play costs 1 less. Honestly, I won't linger too long on this leader because he is very, very similar to Poe, minus the whole eject shenanigans. Very aggressive deck. You want to play your pilots. You want to play them faster because pilots make big ships, and big ships kill people. That is what it is. And now we're going to take a look more at what the individual pilots do here, mainly because, as I had mentioned earlier in this video, pilots have the concern of being removed, right? And losing you card advantage. Well, just as stated earlier, we have quite a few cards here, quite a few pilots here that let you get more cards. So the first one, of course, being Snap Wexley, that says search the top 5 cards of your deck for a resistance card, reveal it, and draw it. Well, lucky for us, most of the pilots that we've gotten have been sorry, let me rephrase that. Quite a few of the new cards that we've gotten that are actually pretty good are resistance. We have BB-8, we have the new Poe Dameron, we have the old Poe Dameron. So while your deck won't be entirely resistant, in my experience trying out this card, you will almost always hit 1 or 2 resistance cards in your top 5. So this card replaces itself and gives a +2/+2. Very strong card. And of course, we have Luke Skywalker as a pilot, extremely strong card. Not only can you attach him to a unit to give +3/+2. Yes, paying 3 for that is pretty strong, is pretty expensive. However, he has the ability that says if this upgrade would be defeated, you may instead move him to the ground arena as a unit and exhaust him. And that doesn't only work when he's removed with Confiscate or Fang Fighter or something like that. It also works when the vehicle is defeated. So you're giving something +3/+2, and when defeated, get a +3/+2 on ground. Very strong effect. Of course, we have Frisk that says when played as an upgrade, you may defeat an upgrade that costs 2 or less. So he's a pilot that actually kills other pilots. Very strong. And we have a bunch of other pilots, a lot of them costing only 0 or 1 to pilot. And with Wedge, they cost 1 less. Honestly, he's a very fast leader, very fast deck. Now let's move on to Green Villainy. We have Darth Vader, our pilot, who says, action, tap if you've attacked with a non-token vehicle unit this phase, create a TIE Fighter token. And on epic action for 6, you get to deploy him either as a 5/6 or you can deploy him as an upgrade 5+5+5, and when deployed as an upgrade, create 2 TIE Fighter tokens. Creating a token, even if it is a 1/1 for no resources, is a very strong ability. For anyone who has played against Newt Gunray from set 3, while he may not have made a big splash in a competitive scene, he was a very strong card in limited, whether that's draft or sealed. In general, getting 3 units is very strong, and unlike Newt, he makes them in space, and he has ways to make them stronger. So the best way, let's take a look at some of those cards. So of course we have the Victor Leader, which is Vader's TIE Fighter, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong, which says each other friendly space unit gets +1/+1. That's right, all the tokens that you're creating are now 2/2 instead. That is very, very strong. Of course, we have his 2 wingmen. We have Wingman Victor 3 that says when played as an upgrade, you may give an experience token to another unit. So if you have 2 units in space, very likely because you just attacked with a vehicle, right, to get a token, well, attach this to one, give it +1/+1, give an experience to the other one, give it +1/+1. Just very strong buffing abilities. Of course, we have Wingman Victor 2 that says when played, give +1/+1, and create a TIE Fighter token. Honestly, this is a deck that will spam out units in space, and having a lot of small units in space is threatening because, yes, of course, having 4 1/1s might not seem like much, but if every turn they're being ignored and dealing 4 damage to the base, it adds up very quickly. There is not much in the game yet that can deal with a lot of small units. There are a few cards, of course, and a few other ones that were introduced this set, so it's going to depend on if they see a lot of competitive play. But honestly, having a bunch of tokens that you can buff up, or if you can exploit if you'd like, is a very strong ability. Finally, we also have TIE Ambush Squadron. When played and when defeated, create a TIE Fighter token. Is a 2/3 ambush. Very strong card. You have to put it, deal with the threat that they have, and make more tokens for your side. And finally, our last card we're going to look at here is Air Superiority. If you control more space than units than an opponent, which you almost always will because you have 17 tokens, right? You get to deal 4 damage to a ground unit that your opponent controls. Paying 2 to deal 4, very strong, helps you deal with a lot of non-pilot leaders. Not much else to say. Of course, we have the 11 cost Executor that creates you a bunch of TIE Fighter tokens. But from my experience, this deck is very fast and will very rarely get to the 11 cost slot. But still, hey, it's a good sidecard deck if you're playing against a control deck that goes late, because unlike most other capital ships, it doesn't need to be played as an answer. It can be played as a question. You can play this on an empty board and have them deal with it. There's not much that will deal with it. You can't power the dark side it. If you do Fell the Dragon, you basically have 6 TIE Fighter tokens to work with. Very strong card. Finally, let's move on to Piet. One of the most talked about leaders of this set. So Piet, Piet says, action tap, play a capital ship unit from your hand. It costs 1 less. And on the flip side, he is a 5 cost 2/7 that says each capital ship unit you play costs 2 less. That is a very, very powerful ability. Capital ships are some of the strongest units in this game, so being able to play them sooner is really menacing. Let's take a look at some of the very key strong capital ships that we have. Of course, we have the new Devastator that we were talking about if you're playing red. We have the Assault Cruiser, normally not played much, but if you have a discount on him, why not, right? If you get to play this out for 6, because you deployed Admiral Piet on 5, you survived, you play this for 6, not only do you deal with their threat, but you're ramping even more to get to your even heavier costed cards. We have the big Devastator, we have Relentless, we have Avenger that for some reason I don't have here. Let's take a look at it. We have, of course, the Avenger that everybody knows. Very strong cards. I'm not going to go through every single one. We can look at some of the smaller, lower cost ones that could work very well with him. Ruthless Raider is pretty good. Resupply Carrier. 6 cost for a ramp is normally not great, but if you get to only pay 4 or 5 for this, pretty good, right? Why not ramp more, get your bigger cards, because that way, even if your Piet is defeated, you finally have the resources to play your big ones. We have the Gladiator Star Destroyer, can give something Sentinel, it can give you some breathing room. And why do you need breathing room? Well, because if you've taken a look that almost all of the capital ships that we're looking here are very, very expensive. Other than the 2 exceptions being Outlaw Corona and Corvus, most of them are 6 cost or more. So this is a deck that needs to ramp very quickly and needs to not die because you don't have much early game to sustain yourself. Of course, you could play some early Sentinels, and you're going to have to if you want to survive. But this is a deck that if you have not threatened it in the first 3 or 4 turns, it will run away with the game. You just cannot match this level of unit quality. That's pretty much it. Piet is a very strong card. It's looking to be very similar to Palpatine, the first Palpatine that we had in set 1, in that it is a deck that if you can let it get its things going, it is unstoppable. All right, let's move on to our next one, which will be Admiral Holdo, our resistance leader, who says pay 1 and tap her to give a resistance unit or a unit with a resistance upgrade on it +2/+2 for this phase. And she deploys on 6 as a 3/8 on attack, same ability, giving +2/+2 to a resistance or something with a resistance unit on it. honestly, we have a lot of resistance units. We spoke about it a bit when we were talking about Wedge. Of course, we have the two Poe Damerons. We have BB-8. We have a lot of resistance. This is not all of it. There's a good chunk of them, of course. But safe to say that you won't have a lack of resistance to use this ability on. The fact that you can also use it on a unit that has a resistance upgrade makes it so you can use pretty much any other unit. Let's say you're using the Rebel space units and you have a Snap Wexley on them, well, you can give them another +2/+2. So from my experience, there's not really a lack of times when you can use this ability. It's more a question of, is this ability worth using? So we've seen this already in Wat Tambor in set 3, and Wat Tambor didn't actually need to pay 1 to use it. However, he needed to have a unit that died. So this is a bit different in that you get to use it right away rather than for sacrificing something or waiting for something to die, but you need to pay 1. 1 for a 2/2 could be strong. If you're playing this aggressively, paying 1 to do 2 damage to base is good. However, as a leader, it's not a very aggressive leader. It's meant more as a leader to at least, you need to at least get the resource 6 to deploy her, right? Not sure yet. We're gonna see. Leader heroism side did finally get some good capital ships in Radis that back in the day when you got the late game and you were playing heroism versus villainy, most of the time villainy would cut out the edge, would win out at the end because they just have the better ships. But finally, looks like heroism is getting some good ones. The best example being Radis, of course. If you do control another resistance card, you have Sentinel, and when defeated, deal damage to this unit's power to an enemy unit, and it has 8 power, which is very strong. Which means that even if they kill it, you get to kill their Avenger or Relentless or something like that in revenge. Very strong card. So honestly, it has potential. Resistance decks are not to be messed with. A lot of the new resistance cards are very strong. And honestly, giving something an extra +2/+2 could be very strong, especially if you're going to re-ready them. Let's say you have a A-Wing that you've played a Snap Wexley on. They were looking at something that's attacking for 5, right? And then, well, you get to buff it, make it attack for 7 instead. And then, hey, look at that. You still have 3 resources open. You play BB-8 on something else, and you attack again. That's 14 damage that you just dealt on your 4 resource turn. Could be very aggressive, could be very strong. Remains to be seen. Now we're going to move on to the last color. We have the blue leaders. We're going to start off with Rose Tico, whose ability is very similar to something we've seen in set 3. So she says action, heal 2 damage from a vehicle unit that attacked this phase. Similar in a certain way to Obi-Wan in that it's healing your own units for free. However, unlike Obi-Wan, you need to have attacks with the unit. That is a big drawback, but the payoff could potentially be worth it because healing 2 from a vehicle unit is quite a lot. And on the flip side, sorry, she deploys on 5. She's a 4/6. Pretty good stat line, honestly. And on attack, you may heal 2 from a vehicle unit. Pretty similar to her front. Now, what makes her good is the fact that a lot of vehicles have ambush, and that kind of circumvents the need for, well, the need for the vehicles to attack, right? Because they'll come in, they'll attack on the same turn that they come in, and then you get to heal up whatever you just ambushed with, making it so as if you killed something without taking damage. Very strong ability. Of course, we have the Escort Skiff. It's a 4/4 for 4 ambush, most likely if you have other green units. Then we have the new blue leader that can either ambush space for 3 or ambush ground for 5. Very strong card. Or even ambush space for 3, then move the ground. You can heal it right back up. Very strong ability. Then we can have space sentinels that you can put up that are hard to bypass if you're healing them by 2 every single turn, especially if you put pilots on them, by the way. Having something with a pilot that's normally like a space unit will have 3 to 4 health, but if you have let's say a Concord Dawn Interceptors and you've put, I don't know, a Snap Wexley on it or something, or you give it an extra 2 or 3 health, suddenly that becomes very hard to deal with, especially if you are healing it for 2 every single turn. They need to deal with it entirely all in one or not at all. We also have the Red Squadron X-Wing, which when played can deal 2 damage to itself to draw a card. Next turn you get to attack and heal it back up. Pretty good. We have the Marauder, who has ambush, comes in, kills something, hopefully ramps you, maybe, and then you can heal it back up. Honestly, very strong effect. Of course, we have the new Silver Angel as well. It's a 2-cost 2/3, not the best stat line. However, it says when 1 or more damage is healed from this unit, you can deal 1 damage to a space unit. Incredibly powerful effect. Honestly, most of the time, like we said, early game, most ships are 2/3, right? So you turn 2 starts, you get to attack into their ship, and then they have to deal with the Silver Angel. They need to either trade back into it, or you heal it back up, and you kill their unit for free. The fact that this doesn't have ambush is a bit of a downside, of course. However, I think it's still a good card that will definitely be played in every Rose Tico deck, and potentially even every Obi-Wan deck. And finally, if you have vehicles that you want to play and you want to give them ambush, we have the infamous wedge from the first set that says each friendly vehicle gets 1/1 and ambush. This didn't see much play, mainly because as a 5-cost 5/5, it was easy to deal with. However, from what we've seen in testing in set 4, most of the time ground arena is being ignored other than leaders being deployed. So Wedge might be able to survive on ground and buff up all of your space units, give you just enough time to ambush and heal back up with Rose. And then we're going to move on to our second Heroism Blue. We have Lando Calrissian. Lando says action, pay 1, play a unit from your hand by paying its cost. If you do and you control a ground unit and a space unit, give a shield token to a unit. Epic action of 7 can either deploy as a 5/7 Sentinel in ground or as a +5/+5 with Sentinel as an upgrade to a unit, and when deployed you can give a shield token to a unit in a different arena. So I think the best comparison we have for Lando is Luke Skywalker from set 1, in that you paid 1 to give something a shield. Definitely has a more of a twist to it. However, Luke needed something to be played that same phase. This doesn't care if the unit that you're giving a shield was played on the same phase. However, you need to have a unit in both arenas. That's a very heavy drawback, because most of the time, I mean, you wouldn't necessarily be lane dodging, but for you to have a unit in both, I mean, it's not easy. There's definitely ways to do it, and we're going to talk about that in a second because there are some cards that help that. But also keep in mind that he's an epic action of 7, so this card wants to go late, right? And one of the advantages, unlike Luke, is that you can give the shield to the same unit over and over. If you have a Concord Dawn Interceptor in space that's being a Sentinel, that's really stopping your opponent from dealing damage to your base, well, every single turn you can give it a shield, making it so your opponent can just never get through. Right, so now you're gonna have to look at some of the cards that help you get there. I think a key card to look at, for example, would be General Draven. It says when played on attack, create an X-Wing token. 5 cost, essentially a 4/7 because of the X-Wing that's coming in play. Why does this matter for Lando? Is because when you play him, you pay the 1, you play Draven, then Draven triggers, creates your X-Wing. There you go, you already have something in ground and in space, and then you get to give something a shield right away. Are the units strong enough to give a shield to? That's up to you to decide. Of course, then we have Poe Dameron, which is very similar. When you play it as a unit, you get to create an X-Wing token, and if you choose to not attach this, you now have something in both lanes. You have something to shield to. Of course, we have the Gold Leader, which is, I believe, meant to be played with Lando. He's a 6 cost. When this unit is defending, the attacker gets -1. If you deploy Lando on this, it's a 10/10 leader unit. Not easy to deal with, and it's shielded. It has Sentinel. It pretty much makes it so they need to sacrifice a lot of their space units to get through. Finally, we have Tandem Assault, which is the same requirements as Lando. Attack with a space unit. If you attack with a ground unit, that ground unit gets +2. Again, this needs you to have units in both space and ground for a very strong effect. However, this is a very aggressive effect. I'm not sure if it works necessarily well with Lando. Of course, we have Rose Tico that can turn shields into 2 experiences. Pretty good if you're able to spam shields on Rose every single turn. Rose can become pretty big and hard to deal with. And finally, we're going to look at some cards to help you maintain the board state. So you need to keep a unit in both space and ground. And how do you do that? You play cards that are what we call sticky. You want cards that are very hard to deal with. So of course, the one that everyone knows is Cobb Vanth. It's a ground unit. When defeated, search the top 10. For a unit that costs 2 or less, discard it. You get to play that for free from your discard. So you get to play a unit. If it dies, you get to play another unit, making it so it helps you keep units in at least one in each zone, right? And then finally, we have L337 and Luke Skywalker. Very similar effects. So we spoke about Luke earlier. You play it as an upgrade. If it dies, either as an upgrade or the ship dies, he comes into the ground. You didn't actually lose a card. You still have a unit in play. And L3 is pretty much the reverse of that. You play her for 3/3, and when she's defeated, you get to move her as a pilot onto another ship. So having these units that are very hard to deal with. So let's say you have we have a Concord Dawn Interceptor, and the next turn you play this using Lando's ability. You give the Interceptor a shield. So you have a 3/3 in play on ground, and then they try to kill her. It goes onto the Interceptor. Now your Interceptor is a 4/7 that defends for 6, and it has a shield. Honestly, very strong board state. Will it be enough to not die until you get to resource turn 7? Remains to be seen. I think Lando has some potential. People are definitely underestimating him, but is he good enough? Only time will tell. Finally, we're going to move on to Blue Villainy. Blue Villainy, we have Asajj Ventress. Asajj Ventress says, action, deal 1 damage to a friendly unit. If you do, deal 1 damage to an enemy unit in the same arena. And on epic action for 6 cost, she has to deploy as either a 4/6 with grit, or attach as a pilot as +3/+4, giving that unit grit. And on attack, you may deal 1 damage to a friendly unit. If you do, deal 1 damage to an enemy unit in the same arena. To be noted, this 1 damage could be dealt to the unit that she is attached to. So that's something. So what makes Asajj interesting is, well, grit, right? She seems to be the grit leader. Dealing 1 damage to one of your units to deal it to another unit in the same arena is a very interesting effect, because it is a ping effect that doesn't have much of a requirement, as we've seen a lot of the other ping effects. Cad Bane wants you to play Underworld, Quinlan needs you to play the same cost, Luke needs you to attack with a fighter. This doesn't have that kind of requirement. However, it does need you to have a unit in this same arena. Luckily, there are a bunch of very good grit cards on ground, and this set is giving us some very interesting space alternatives as well. We spoke about Silver Angel earlier. Well, you get to play this, use Asajj's effect to deal 1 damage to this and to something else in space, right? And, well, you get to heal it back up. How do you do that? There are some interesting new cards from the new set. So, of course, there's this Trace Mark. Sorry, we have this Trace Martez pilot that we haven't spoken about earlier. It says, attach unit gains. On attack, you may heal 2 total damage from any number of your units. You attach this to the Silver Angel, and then every turn you get to use Asajj to not only deal 1 to the Angel, and then heal it back up, but deal another 1 because of Silver Angel's effect. Pretty good. And we have Interceptor Ace that can attach itself to any vehicle and give it grit. Works well with Asajj. We have Banshee that says you may deal damage to a unit equal to the amount of damage on this unit. We've seen this effect already on another card. I'm gonna butcher its name, but the Kurz, whatever it's called, the Wookiee from set 2. It didn't see much play. See if I can find it here. There we go. Kursantan. There you go. A very similar effect to this. However, this is a space unit, and you don't need to change into red. This is a blue card. Works very well with Asajj, especially if you put Asajj on Banshee. Could definitely lead to some very crippling attacks. And finally, the last card we're going to look at that works well with Asajj is Power from Pain. 3 cost, give a unit +1/+0 for this phase for each damage on it. Does that sound like grit? Yes, it does, because that is basically grit. So what makes this card interesting is that it doubles your grit. So in a world where you have Asajj on a unit, let's say you have it on Banshee, you already have 5 damage on it because you've killed something and you've triggered Asajj's effect, and then you sorry. So we're looking at +3/+4. We're looking at a 7/9. Let's say it's been dealt 5 damage. So it's now a 12/5. right? Or a 12-4, and you add power from pain, and that becomes suddenly a 17-4. Absurd numbers. Very strong damage dealing potential. However, you're damaging your own units, making it easier for your opponent to deal with them. So I think this is a very high risk, high reward leader. Finally, for our last leader of the set, we're going to take a look at Grand Admiral Thrawn. One of the most interesting leaders from this set. Says when you use a when defeated ability, you may exhaust this leader. If you do, use that ability again. Very strong. And then on the flip side, when you use a when defeated ability, you may use that ability again, only once each round. When defeated, in general, is a very strong keyword. There are a lot of cards that already see play even without needing to use it a second time. But there are some cards that work extremely well where you can double it up. So let's go ahead and check some of those out. So of course, number one, we have Director Cunning. He does not have a when defeated ability, but he says the first unit you play each round that has a when defeated ability costs one less. So honestly, it lets you play your bigger, dangerous units much faster. We have basic smaller cards like Desperate Commando. When defeated, you may give a unit -1/-1 for this phase. Well, if you trigger this, you can give something -2/-2, killing most early stuff, especially if you've attacked into it with this. We have Admiral Mori, but has potential for some very, very big, strong plays, especially if you want to use this with an exploit or something. Readying 2 units is a borderline game ending. However, let's get into the more interesting, strong ones. We have Cobb Vanth. So if you're playing Admiral Thrawn in green and you play Cobb Vanth, when defeated, this searches the top 10 cards twice, and you can play out 2 cards for free. This makes your board extremely sticky and hard to deal with. We have Val. So Val has seen some competitive play. We have Bounty, deal 3 damage to a unit, and then when defeated, give 2 experience tokens to a friendly unit. The Bounty doesn't get doubled. Bounties, while triggering when defeated, are not actually a when defeated ability. So yes, your opponent gets to do 3 damage to something. However, you get to give 4 experience tokens to something. Very, very strong effect. Of course, we have a few low-cost cards that work well with him as well. We have the new Onyx Squadron Brute. When defeated, heal 2 damage from a base. You get to heal 4 with this, which will help you get to your bigger threats later on, which are stronger, such as, for example, TIE Ambush Squadron. You play this, you ambush into it. Let's say you ambushed into a 3-2. Killing it, you not only dealt with their threat, but now you have 3 TIE Fighter tokens. We have Chimera, also creating TIE Fighter tokens when defeated. However, also it says when played, you may use a when defeated ability of another friendly unit. So if you have a unit such as Cobb Vanth that they are choosing to ignore because they don't want to deal with the when defeated ability, well, it sucks to be them because you get to play Chimera, trigger it, and because you use the when defeated ability, this doesn't say when something is defeated, it says when you use an ability. So you get to use Chimera on, let's say, Cobb Vanth, trigger it a second time. There you go, you get 2 free units, and then you get to then Suicide Cobb Vanth is something, use it a third time if you want. Honestly, extremely powerful card to be used with Thrawn. And we have a lot more when defeated. We're not going to go through every single one, but there's some really big, strong ones as well. Fleet Interdictor, capital ship, 7 cost 6/6 with a Sentinel. When defeated, defeat a space unit that costs 3 or less. With the amount of space that we're going to be seeing this set, this is a very strong card. If you are going to go into red, which seems to be a very good pairing because red has a lot of when defeated, we have Ruthless Raider that everybody knows about. And then, of course, there's a Rokai Gunship to deal 1 damage to a unit or base. Not necessarily great. And then, of course, there's Starwing Scout. Now, what's good about Thrawn is that it is not an action ability, it's a triggered ability, right? So very often you will have the initiative because all you're doing is playing a card and then claiming initiative. And you can still trigger Thrawn's effect of doubling when defeated, even if you've already claimed. If you have no actions left for the turn, you claim, they try and kill this. You get to draw 4 cards, and if they choose to not kill it, well, you have the initiative. Next turn, attack into something and kill it and draw 4 cards. Honestly, just 1 trigger of this, and you don't need to draw any cards for the rest of the game. That is pretty absurd. To a lesser extent, we have the Landing Shuttle, which is meant to be used with Thrawn as well. It's 2/4 for 3. When defeated, draw a card. Pretty strong effect.
I think Thrawn has the potential for some very debilitating turns, and it's a card. It's a deck that needs to be played against very differently. Very strong effect. Of course, we have heavy if for some reason you're playing against a very ground heavy deck. When if you deal 1 to every enemy ground unit on death, in this case, it will deal 2 to everything. And honestly, dealing 2 to everything on ground is pretty strong. It'll get rid of most board states. So yeah, that's it for all the leaders for this set. However, we're going to give a very small final segment. We're going to talk about some leaders from older sets that I believe have very strong potential with a lot of the new cards. Of course, we're going to start off with Hera Syndulla, very obvious. Not much to say here. While she didn't get any updates, there are a lot of new Spectre cards this set. So keep an eye on her. Being able to finally play a deck full of Spectres could make her more relevant, ignoring all aspect penalties. Lets you play double green and have command and stuff like that. Or you can even play with the new colorless base if you want 4 extra health. Something to keep an eye on, basically. Of course, we have Grand Moff Tarkin and Leia Organa, the Rebel and Imperial leaders. Both are going to see quite a bump because we have finally a lot of new Imperial units and a lot of new Rebel units. They might not be the flashy new toys, but they got flashy new toys, and they are not something to be disregarded. Of course, there's Anakin Skywalker. Twofold reasons why it's something to keep an eye on. First one being, of course, the new base Colossus. Here, let's take a look at it. We have Colossus that says it has 35 health instead of the usual 30, and it says draw 1 less card in your starting hand. Anakin needs more health on base. Why? Because you do damage to your own base, and Anakin gets stronger based on how much damage you have on your base. So having an extra 5 lets Anakin hit harder, right? And that 1 extra penalty on draw is not that big of a deal on Anakin, mainly because there are a lot of heroism blue cards that draw you cards. We have Yoda, of course. There's Quill. There's Obi-Wan. Anakin has ways to keep drawing, of course. If you want, you can even play C-3PO to draw you more cards to disregard that disadvantage. And the second aspect of what makes Anakin really strong this set is, of course, pilots. And I'm not talking about pilots on your own units. I'm talking about pilots on enemy units. In general, pilots give an extra 2 to 3 health to units. And being able to use Anakin's ability to basically kill something that has a pilot on it is incredibly strong. Yeah, like if both players have an A-wing in play, that might be a poor example because A-wings kill each other. But if both players have a 2-3 in space, if you're against Poe, he has his black one in play. You have Anakin's interceptor, right? Both 2-3s, they can't actually kill each other. Well, Poe attaches itself to black one. Anakin gets to use his ability and kill it because that's Anakin's interceptor is now attacking for 4. So nullifying some of that health advantage that pilots give you. In hindsight, maybe that black one was not a good example because on swing it can kill it due to its effect. But you get the gist of it. Being able to attack for very big numbers and kill ships with pilots on it is not an advantage to scoff at. And finally, the last leader that we're going to look at, well, the one I think is going to have the biggest bump in strength this set will be the Mandalorian. When you play an upgrade, you may exhaust this leader. If you do, exhaust an enemy unit with 4 or less remaining HP. Upgrades in general didn't see much play, mainly for the same reason why people are skeptical about pilots, in that upgrades are either easy to remove or easy to 2-for-1. So with the Mandalorian, with all the new pilots coming in, if you're talking about pilots that draw you cards or replace cards, or pilots that don't give you a card disadvantage, the Mandalorian lets you, on pilot equip, exhaust something. That is a very, very strong effect. It gives you a huge tempo swing. Not only did you just make your ship stronger, but you also removed whatever they were about to attack with to potentially take care of your ship. And of course, it also works really well with the new Mandalorian that was revealed this set. whether you're playing this in double yellow to play it as a ground unit or just a simple yellow that you're going to play it as an upgrade, you're exhausting 2 units either way. Because if you pay 2 for this, give something +3/+1, exhaust something in this arena, well, then you get to tap Mandalorian Leader, and you get to tap something else that has 4 less remaining HP. Something to definitely keep an eye on. So honestly, that's it for today, folks. It's been a long video, but I'm very glad we got through it. I am very excited for set 4, coming very soon, mid-March, and thank you for if you made it all the way through. Don't forget to leave a like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. And if you guys have any feedback or any ideas for what other videos you want, please let me know. And thank you for listening to Dinosaur Gaming. Have a great day.